Chapter 1. The copper dust. The heat was the first thing to vanish, not the suffocating baked earth heat of the Kandahar sun, but the steady, rhythmic warmth of the hand tangled in the thick fur at the scruff of his neck. Titan, a 70-pound Belgian Malinois, lay pinned under a slab of drywall. His ears, usually swiveling like radar dishes to catch the snap of a twig or the click of a rifle safety, were flattened flush against his skull. The world was entirely silent, save for a high-pitched ringing that vibrated deep within his jawbone. The air smelled wrong. The familiar scents of dried sage, diesel fuel, and Sergeant Miller's peppermint chewing gum were gone. In their place was a violent assault on his senses: pulverized concrete, burning rubber, sulfur, and the sharp, hot copper tang of fresh blood. Titan scrambled, his claws scraping uselessly against the rebar and debris. His left hind leg flared with a white-hot agony, but the pain was secondary to the frantic, blinding need in his chest. He shoved his wedge-shaped head through a gap in the rubble, scraping the fur from his snout until he saw him. Sergeant Miller was lying on his back 10 feet away. Titan let out a high, keening whine. He forced his body through the opening, ignoring the jagged metal that sliced his flank. He limped toward the unmoving figure, his tail tucked tight between his legs. Up, Titan huffed, nudging Miller's limp hand with his wet nose. The command was ingrained in his marrow: up, search, heal, but Miller didn't move. Titan licked the thick layer of gray ash from the sergeant's cheek, tasting salt and dust. The man's chest, which usually rose and fell with a comforting, predictable rhythm, was perfectly, terrifyingly still. Titan pressed his heavy head against Miller's chest, right over the heart. He knew the sounds of the human body, the rushing rivers of veins, the drumbeat of a heart, the whistling of lungs. Now there was only silence. Footsteps vibrated through the earth, heavy boots, shouting voices, panic. Titan stood, squaring his shoulders, the hair along his spine standing straight up in a jagged ridge of black and tan. He planted his paws over Miller's body and bared his teeth, letting out a low, guttural snarl that rumbled like a distant engine. Mine, the growl said. My pack, do not touch him. Hands reached for him, uniforms smelling of sweat and fear. Titan snapped, his jaws clicking, shut an inch from a soldier's wrist. He didn't want to bite them. He knew these men, recognized the scent of their boot polish and sweat, but a wild, blinding terror had seized his brain. He could not let them take Miller. If they took him, the pack was broken. Easy, Titan. Easy, boy, stand down, a voice choked out. Titan barked, a sharp, deafening sound, bracing for a fight. But then came the sharp prick in his uninjured thigh. A frantic second of thrashing, a sudden, terrifying heaviness in his limbs, and then the dark, suffocating fog rolled in, dragging him down into nothingness. Chapter 2. The concrete box. They called it a shelter, but Titan knew a cage when he smelled one. The air here tasted of bleach, stale urine, and the sour, acidic stench of 50 different dogs radiating fear. The humming of the fluorescent tubes overhead sounded exactly like the distant drone of a medevac helicopter. Keeping Titan in a permanent state of hyperarousal, he paced. 3 steps to the chain-link door, turn. 3 steps to the concrete wall, turn. His claws clicked against the floor in a manic rhythm. The wound on his flank had healed into a thick, hairless pink scar, and his back leg carried a permanent stiffness. But the physical scars were nothing compared to the phantom leash he felt tugging at his neck. He was waiting for the whistle, 2 short bursts. That was the signal to return to Miller's side. He had been waiting for 72 days. He"s unadoptable, Sarah, a heavy voice echoed from the hallway. The metallic squeal of the shelter door opening made Titan freeze, his muscles corded and tense. 2 figures stopped outside his run. One was the shelter manager, a man who smelled of cigarettes and pity. The other was a woman, clutching a clipboard to her chest like a shield. Look at him, the manager said quietly. He's a retired military working dog. Survived an IED blast that killed his handler. He got severe PTSD, barrier frustration, and unpredictable. If a car backfires outside, he tries to chew through the concrete. We can put him in a home. The military didn't want him back, and a civilian family can't handle him. So what happens to him? The woman asked, her voice trembled. Tomorrow morning at 8, the manager said softly. It's a kindness, Sarah. He's living in a war zone inside his own head. Titan didn't understand the words, but he understood the shift in their pheromones. He smelled resignation. He smelled the end of the line. He turned his back to them, retreating to the darkest corner of the kennel, and curled into a tight ball, resting his chin on his scarred paws. He closed his amber eyes, wishing the hum of the lights would stop. Then a third scent drifted into the kennel. It slipped past the bleach and the fear. It was a tiny scent, smelling of rain-soaked wool, strawberry soap, and something profoundly broken. It was a scent Titan recognized implicitly. It smelled like the hollow, echoing emptiness of grief. Titan opened his eyes. Standing a few feet behind the woman was a little girl. She couldn't have been older than 8. She wore a bright yellow raincoat that dwarfed her fragile frame and a pair of muddy red rain boots. Her hair was a messy tangle of brown curls. But it was her face that made Titan rise slowly to his feet. Her face was entirely blank. Her eyes, wide and pale green, stared through the world rather than at it. She was suffocating in silence. The girl walked forward, ignoring the manager's sudden gasp. Ilara, no, honey, step back from the cage. Her mother reached out, but the girl slipped through her grasp like water. Ilara walked right up to the chain-link fence of Titan's run. She didn't make a sound. She didn't wave her fingers or make clicking noises with her tongue like the other humans did. She simply stopped, raised her small, pale hand, and pressed her palm flat against the cold metal wire. Titan's heart hammered against his ribs. The conditioning kicked in. Stranger, threat, guard, and a low growl began to vibrate in his throat, but Ilara didn't flinch. She just stood there offering her stillness to him. Titan stopped growling. He took one step forward, then another. The shelter manager was frozen, his hand gripping the mother's arm, holding his breath. Titan reached the fence. He lowered his massive head, inhaling deeply. He smelled the salt of recently dried tears on her cheeks. He smelled the cold, terrifying void inside her, a void that perfectly mirrored his own, very slowly, deliberately. Titan leaned forward and pressed his wet nose against the chain link. Resting it exactly against the spot where her small hand was pressed on the other side. He let out a long, shuddering sigh. For the first time in 72 days, the phantom leash around Titan's neck went slack. Ilara's mother let out a strangled sob. She hasn't reached out to anything since her father's accident. The manager stared wide-eyed. I don't believe it. Ilara looked into Titan's amber eyes. A silent language passed between them, a contract written in the language of the lost. You are broken, her eyes said. I am broken too. Chapter 3. The storm, the car ride, was a torment of terrifying velocity and passing shadows, but Titan endured it because Ilara sat beside him in the backseat. Her hand never left his back, her small fingers anchoring him to the present moment, keeping him from slipping back into the burning dust of Kandahar. The house smelled of lemon polish, old paper, and a faint, lingering masculine scent that made Ilara's mother cry quietly in the kitchen. Titan immediately went to work. He limped through the house, his nose twitching, cataloging every exit, every window, every shadowed corner. When he was satisfied the perimeter was secure, he chose his post, the small rug at the base of the stairs. From here he could see the front door and the hallway leading to the kitchen, and he could guard the stairs leading up to Ilara's room. He circled twice and lay down, resting his heavy head on his paws. Sarah, Ilara's mother, walked past him cautiously. She set a bowl of expensive kibble and fresh water near him. Goodbye, Titan, she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. She was afraid of him. Titan knew this. Her heart rate spiked whenever he looked at her. But she tolerated him for the silent girl upstairs. Titan ignored the food. A soldier on watch does not eat until the shift is over. Night fell, wrapping the house in thick, suffocating darkness. At 2 a.m. the air pressure dropped violently. Titan's ears pricked up, his fur stood on end. He smelled the ozone before the first flash of light tore through the living room windows. 3 seconds later the thunder hit, crack boom. It wasn't thunder to Titan, it was mortar fire. The floorboards shook, and in Titan's mind, the drywall was crumbling again. The heat was back. The smell of sulfur and blood flooded his nostrils. He scrambled backward, his claws tearing gashes into the hardwood floor, letting out a frantic, high-pitched scream that sounded entirely undog-like. He crashed into the side table, knocking over a lamp that shattered into 100 pieces. Cover, find cover. He squeezed himself underneath the heavy oak dining table, pressing his back against the wall, shaking so violently his teeth chattered. He snapped at the empty air, trying to bite the phantom hands that were pulling him away from Miller. Flash, boom, another artillery strike. Titan whimpered, curling into a tight, miserable ball, a fierce warrior reduced to a terrified pup. He squeezed his eyes shut, waiting for the blast wave. Soft footsteps padded across the floorboards. Titan opened his eyes, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Alara stood at the edge of the dining room. She was wearing a faded, oversized t-shirt, her bare feet surrounded by the shards of the broken lamp. The lightning flashed again, illuminating her pale face. Titan growled a low, warning rumble. Danger, stay back, I don't know what I am doing. Alara ignored the warning. She dropped to her hands and knees and crawled under the table. Titan shrank back, baring his teeth, his chest heaving. The thunder crashed again, and Titan squeezed his eyes shut, letting out a sharp cry of terror. Then he felt it. Small, warm arms wrapped around his thick, trembling neck. Alara buried her face into his coarse fur, right behind his ear. She didn't pet him. She didn't speak soothing nonsense. She simply anchored her entire body weight against his side, applying deep, grounding pressure. Titan froze. He opened his eyes. He could feel her small heart beating against his ribs. It was beating fast, but it was steady. He took a jagged breath, inhaling the scent of strawberry soap and sleep. The ozone faded, the sulfur dissolved. Slowly, the violent trembling in Titan's legs began to subside. He let out a long, shaky exhale, his hot breath ruffling the hair on Alara's arm. He lowered his heavy head until it rested across her small lap. Outside, the storm raged on, throwing shadows across the walls. But underneath the oak table, wrapped in the arms of a silent child, the war in Titan's head finally paused. He closed his eyes, listening to the steady rhythm of her heartbeat, and for the first time in months, he slept without dreaming of the blood. Chapter 4. The intruder spring melted the frost from the windows, but the chill inside the house remained. Titan had established a rigid routine. At 0600, he woke and patrolled the fence line of the backyard. At 0730, he sat at the foot of the stairs, waiting for Alara to come down for breakfast. He walked her to the yellow school bus at the end of the driveway, sitting like a stone gargoyle until the bus disappeared around the bend. The bus driver, a heavy-set man named Carl, once reached out to pet him. Titan had merely turned his head, fixing Carl with a stare so icy and unblinking that the man slowly pulled his hand back, muttering an apology. Titan was not a pet, he was a detail. Alara was his mission. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late October. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of decaying leaves and wood smoke. Titan was lying on the front porch, tracking the trajectory of a squirrel across the oak tree when a new scent caught the wind. It was a sharp, metallic odor, unfamiliar sweat, stale beer, adrenaline. Titan's ears swiveled forward. He stood up slowly, not making a sound. A rusty pickup truck idled at the curb. A man stepped out. He was tall, wearing a heavy work jacket despite the mild weather. He didn't walk with the relaxed gait of a neighbor or the purposeful stride of a mail carrier. He walked on the balls of his feet. He was scanning the windows of the house. He was hunting. Titan's lip curled back, exposing a sliver of white canine, but he held his ground in the shadow of the porch, waiting. Sarah was inside, typing on her computer. Ilara was upstairs, drawing in her sketchbook. They were vulnerable. The man walked up the driveway, his eyes fixed on the front door. He reached inside his heavy jacket. Titan didn't bark. Barking was for warnings. Barking gave the enemy time to react. Titan was trained for apprehension. As the man set his foot on the first wooden step of the porch, Titan moved. He launched himself from the shadows like a 70-pound missile. He didn't aim for the face or the throat. He was a disciplined soldier. He aimed for the center of mass. Titan struck the man square in the chest, the sheer kinetic force lifting the intruder entirely off his feet. They crashed backward onto the gravel driveway with a sickening thud. The man screamed, a high, reedy sound of absolute shock. He scrambled wildly, throwing his arms up to protect his face. Titan stood over him, one heavy paw planted firmly on the man's sternum, pinning him to the earth. Now Titan released the sound he had been holding back, a roar that seemed to shake the very leaves from the trees. It was a guttural, terrifying explosion of rage and dominance, a sound born in the mountains of Europe and forged in the deserts of war. The man froze, his eyes wide with stark terror, staring up into the dripping jaws of the beast standing over him. From inside the man's jacket, a heavy steel pry bar slipped out and clattered against the gravel. The front door flew open. Sarah rushed out, screaming, her phone already in her hand. Titan didn't look at her. His amber eyes remained locked on the man's throat. Move, his stare dared the intruder. Give me a reason. The police arrived in 4 minutes. When the cruisers pulled up, lights flashing, the officers drew their weapons, yelling commands. Call off the dog, lady, call him off. An officer shouted. Sarah was crying, terrified. Titan, stop, come. Titan ignored her. She was not his handler. She did not have the authority to break his hold. Then the screen door squeaked. Ilara stood on the porch. She looked at the flashing red and blue lights, at the men with guns, at the man trembling beneath her dog. She walked down the steps. The police yelled for her to stay back, but she ignored them, just as she ignored everything else in the world. She walked up to Titan. She didn't speak. She reached out and gently laid her small hand flat against his scarred flank. She tapped twice. Release. Titan instantly stepped back. He didn't break eye contact with the man on the ground. But he moved to position himself perfectly between the intruder and Ilara, standing broadside. A living shield of muscle and bone. The officers moved in, cuffing the man, dragging him away. One of the cops, a K9 handler by the look of his uniform, holstered his weapon and stared at Titan with profound respect. That's not a house pet, ma'am, the officer said quietly to Sarah. That's a weapon with a heartbeat, who trained him. Sarah looked at her silent daughter, whose fingers were buried deep in the thick fur of the dog's neck. He trained himself to her. That night the house felt different, the air was lighter. When Titan went to his post at the bottom of the stairs, Sarah came out of the kitchen. She held a small piece of cooked steak. She knelt down, keeping a respectful distance, and held it out on her flat palm. Titan looked at the meat, then up into her eyes. He slowly leaned forward and took it with incredible gentleness, being careful not to let his teeth graze her skin. Thank you, Sarah whispered, a tear slipping down her cheek. Thank you for keeping her safe. Titan swallowed the meat and rested his chin on his paws. He closed his eyes. The pack was finally starting to smell like home. But a dog's nose knows things long before human eyes can see them, and as Titan slept, his nose twitched, catching a faint. Bitter scent drifting on the midnight wind, the scent of rotting wood, wet earth. And something ancient and hungry waking up in the dense woods behind the house. The war wasn't over. It had just changed battlefields. Chapter 5, The perimeter expanded. Titan no longer cared about the mail carrier or the heavy yellow school bus. His amber eyes were now locked constantly on the tree line, a jagged wall of ancient oaks and towering blue spruces that bordered the backyard. Swallowing the autumn light, To Sarah, the woods were just a scenic backdrop, a place where deer occasionally emerged to graze on the lawn. To Titan, they were a tactical nightmare. The shadows were too deep. The wind shifted unpredictably, twisting the scents before they reached his nose. And beneath the smell of decaying pine needles and damp soil, that bitter, predatory musk was growing stronger. It smelled of dried blood, infected wounds, and starvation. Titan altered his patrol route. Instead of walking the manicured grass, he dragged his scarred hind leg through the dense, thorny brush right at the edge of the property line. He marked the boundary aggressively, scratching the frozen earth with his hind paws to leave the pheromones from his paw pads, sending a clear biological message into the darkness. This territory is held, turn back. But the scent did not retreat. It lingered, heavy and arrogant. November brought a biting frost that turned the grass into shattered glass beneath Titan's paws. Elara began spending her afternoons on the back patio, bundled in a thick wool coat, her sketchbook resting on her knees. She drew with a frantic, silent intensity. Charcoal blackened her small fingertips. Titan sat squarely between her and the trees. He sat tall, his broad chest puffed out, his ears rotating in constant surveillance. The cold ached in his injured leg, a dull, throbbing reminder of the Kandahar rubble, but he refused to lie down. If he lay down, his field of vision dropped by 2 feet. That was unacceptable. One afternoon, the wind died completely. The air grew unnaturally still, the kind of heavy, suffocating silence that precedes a sniper-esque crack. Titan's nose flared. The bitter scent washed over him, suddenly overwhelming. It was close, less than 50 yards. He stood up, the hair along his spine, rising into a rigid mohawk. A low rumble started in his chest, vibrating through his ribs. He locked his gaze on a thick patch of rhododendrons just beyond the property line. Crack. A thick branch snapped under immense weight. It wasn't the light, delicate step of a white-tailed deer. It was heavy, deliberate. Elara stopped drawing. For the first time, she looked up, her pale green eyes tracking Titan's rigid posture. Titan took 2 steps forward, placing himself entirely on the freezing grass, off the patio. He let the growl roll out of his throat, louder this time, baring his teeth to flash a blinding white warning against the gray afternoon. From the shadows of the rhododendrons, a massive shape shifted. It was a black bear, but it looked entirely wrong. A bear in late November should be fat, lethargic, preparing for the long sleep. This creature was a walking skeleton, wrapped in matted, tar-black fur. Its left shoulder carried a grotesque, festering gash likely from a hunter's poorly aimed rifle or a violent territorial dispute. It was starving, feverish, and driven completely mad by pain, a sleepwalker. The most dangerous thing in the woods. The bear pushed its massive head through the brush, its small, dead black eyes fixing directly on the small girl sitting on the patio. It exhaled a ragged, wet sound that carried the stench of rotten meat. Titan didn't hesitate. He charged. He didn't run all the way to the bear. He stopped exactly 10 feet from the tree line, creating a definitive line in the sand. He unleashed a barrage of deafening, explosive barks, his front paws slamming into the frozen earth. He snapped his jaws, making sharp, aggressive lunges forward, feigning an attack to gauge the enemy's resolve. The bear stood up on its hind legs. It towered 8 feet in the air, blotting out the fading sun. It let out a guttural, wet roar that shook the glass in the patio doors. Titan did not flinch. He planted his paws, tilted his head back, and roared back. It was a terrifying display of pure, unadulterated defiance. You are bigger, you are stronger, but I am already dead. I have nothing to lose. For 5 agonizing seconds, the apex predator and the war dog stared each other down. Then the patio door slid open violently. Elara. Sarah screamed, rushing out and grabbing her daughter by the coat, pulling her backward into the house. The sudden movement broke the spell. The bear dropped back to all fours, the ground trembling beneath its weight. It huffed, snapping its jaws in Titan's direction, before slowly turning its massive, scarred body and melting back into the shadows of the pines. Titan did not retreat. He stood at the edge of the woods for a full hour, his muscles shivering from adrenaline and cold, until the bitter scent completely faded from the wind. Only then did he limp back to the glass door and scratch to be let in. Chapter 6. The broken silence. Winter arrived that night, burying the house under a foot of heavy, wet snow. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocating. Sarah had called the local wildlife authorities, but their response was infuriatingly bureaucratic. Keep your trash secured, keep your pets indoors. We can't track a bear in a blizzard. Titan paced the length of the glass doors, his nose pressed against the cold pane, leaving streaks of condensation. He hated the snow. It masked scents, muffled sounds, and blinded him. It took away his tactical advantages. Ilara sat on the floor near him, surrounded by her charcoal pencils. She wasn't drawing the woods anymore, she was drawing Titan. She sketched the harsh, angular lines of his wedge-shaped head, the thick muscle of his neck, the jagged scar on his flank. She drew him not as a dog, but as a sentinel. A guardian forged from shadow and grit. Titan stopped his pacing. He looked down at the girl. He let out a soft huff through his nose and lay down beside her, carefully resting his heavy chin on the edge of her sketchbook. Ilara reached out. Instead of petting his fur, she traced the length of the pink, hairless scar on his leg with a delicate finger. Titan closed his eyes. The touch sent a phantom ache through his hip, a ghost of the Kandahar rubble, but he didn't pull away. He let her explore the map of his pain, understanding that she was looking for a way to navigate her own. Sarah watched them from the kitchen counter, a steaming mug of coffee trembling in her hands. She used to sing, Sarah whispered to the empty room. Before her father died, she wouldn't stop talking. Now, she only talks to him. And she doesn't even use words. The next morning, the snow stopped, leaving the world wrapped in blinding, silent white. Sarah was on the phone in the study, arguing with the insurance company about her late husband's life policy. Her voice was sharp, thick with unshed tears. Titan was asleep on his rug at the bottom of the stairs, exhausted from a night of hypervigilance. Ilara was in the living room. She was staring out the window. At the edge of the woods, against the pure white snow, a flash of brilliant, impossible crimson caught her eye. It was a cardinal. It fluttered in the lower branches of a spruce, its bright red feathers a stark contrast to the monochrome world. To Ilara, it wasn't just a bird. Her father used to tell her that cardinals were visitors from heaven. Whenever you see one, Ellibelly, it means someone who loves you is checking in. The bird fluttered down from the branch, landing on the snow just beyond the tree line. It hopped twice, looking toward the house. Ilara stood up. Her eyes, usually empty, were wide and focused. She didn't put on her boots or her heavy coat. She was wearing only her yellow pajamas and a pair of thin wool socks. She walked silently to the back door, slid the latch open with a soft click, and stepped out into the freezing air. The cold bit into her feet instantly, but she didn't care. She kept her eyes on the crimson bird. Down the hall, Titan's ear twitched, the click of the latch. The sudden rush of cold air cutting through the scent of lemon polish. His eyes snapped open. He scrambled to his feet, his claws slipping on the hardwood floor in his panic. He rounded the corner into the living room. The glass door was open a crack, a gentle breeze blowing snow onto the rug. Ilara was gone. Titan shoved his nose into the gap and forced the heavy door open. He burst out onto the patio. The glare of the sun on the snow blinded him for a second. He dropped his nose to the ground. He smelled the faint, sweet scent of strawberry soap, quickly being erased by the freezing wind. He saw the small, shallow footprints leading directly away from the house, toward the woods. Titan let out a frantic whine. He lunged forward, bounding through the deep snow. Chapter 7. The blood on the snow. Ilara was numb. The snow was up to her knees, soaking her pajama pants, freezing her skin, but she kept walking. The cardinal hopped deeper into the shadows of the pines, always staying just a few feet out of reach. She crossed the invisible boundary line Titan had drawn. The air changed immediately. The bright reflection of the snow vanished, swallowed by the dense canopy of evergreen branches. The silence here was different. It wasn't peaceful, it was predatory. The cardinal flew up into the high branches and disappeared. Alara stopped. She looked around, suddenly realizing how cold she was. She turned around to look at the house, but the dense brush blocked her view. She was completely surrounded by gray wood and dark needles. Then, the smell hit her. It was a horrific stench, like the garbage cans behind the grocery store in the middle of summer, mixed with something sharp and metallic. A heavy, wet huff sounded from behind a massive fallen oak tree 10 yards to her left. Alara froze. The terrifying numbness that had protected her mind for the past 6 months suddenly shattered, replaced by a spike of pure, primal adrenaline. The black bear stepped over the fallen tree. It looked worse than before. The wound on its shoulder was oozing dark fluid. Its ribs showed clearly through its matted fur. It saw the small figure in yellow, shivering in the snow, and it didn't see a human. It saw an easy meal. The bear dropped its massive head, its jaw slacking open to reveal yellowed, broken teeth. It let out a low, rumbling growl and took a step forward. Alara opened her mouth to scream, but her throat was locked tight. The silence she had wrapped around herself like a shield was now choking her. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the dark. A dark blur shot past her left shoulder. Titan hit the bear with the force of a speeding truck. He didn't bother barking. Barking was for warnings. This was war. He launched himself into the air, his jaws opening wide, and clamped his teeth with bone-crushing force into the side of the bear's thick neck, right below the ear. The bear roared a deafening, blood-curdling sound of agony and rage. It reared up on its hind legs, taking Titan with it. Titan held on, his jaws locked, his body swinging violently as the massive beast thrashed. He tasted the foul, infected blood on his tongue, but he clamped down harder, driving his canines deep into the muscle, trying to find the jugular. The bear swiped with a massive paw. The claws, thick as butcher knives, caught Titan across his ribs. The force ripped Titan from his grip. He flew through the air, crashing spine first into the trunk of a pine tree. He hit the ground with a sickening thud, a sharp yelp escaping his lips as the air was violently forced from his lungs. Blood rapidly bloomed across the white snow beneath his side. 3 deep, jagged lacerations tore across his ribcage. The bear shook its head, spraying blood from its torn neck onto the snow. It turned its dead eyes from the dog back to the girl. Titan tried to stand, his front legs buckled. His lungs burned, gasping for oxygen that wouldn't come. The pain was blinding, a white-hot agony that rivaled the IED explosion in Kandahar. "Stay down," his battered body screamed. "You did your job, let it end." He looked at Alara. She was staring at him, her pale green eyes wide with horror, tears finally streaming down her freezing cheeks. Suddenly, the scent of Kandahar vanished. The phantom leash snapped completely. He wasn't Sergeant Miller's dog anymore. He wasn't a soldier following orders. He was Titan, and this was his girl. Titan let out a horrific, guttural snarl that sprayed blood onto the snow. He forced himself up. His left hind leg dragged uselessly, but he pushed off with his good leg, throwing himself between Alara and the charging bear. He didn't leap this time. As the bear lunged downward, its jaws snapping for his spine, Titan dropped low, slipping under the attack. He drove his head upward, burying his teeth deep into the infected, gaping wound on the bear's left shoulder. The bear shrieked, collapsing forward onto its ruined leg. Titan twisted his head violently, tearing muscle and tendon, fully committed to destroying the limb that threatened his pack. The bear thrashed wildly, bringing its heavy, skull-crushing jaws down on Titan's back. Teeth sank deep into Titan's neck, crushing the thick muscle, aiming for the spine. Titan whimpered, his vision going black around the edges. He was losing. The weight was too much. The jaws were too strong. Through the roaring in his ears and the blinding pain, a sound pierced the silence of the woods. It was a sound that hadn't been heard in that house for 6 agonizing months. It was a high, desperate, shattering sound. "Titan!" Alara screamed his name, Chapter 8. The anchor the name tore through the frozen air, a sound so raw and desperate it seemed to shatter the very icicles hanging from the pine boughs. Titan, it was not a command. It was a lifeline thrown into a raging sea. Beneath the crushing weight of the black bear, Titan's vision had begun to narrow into a dark, suffocating tunnel. The sharp agony in his spine was fading into a terrifying, icy numbness. He was ready to let go. He was ready for the quiet. But that single word, her voice, fractured but fiercely alive, acted like a surge of pure electricity straight to his failing heart. He was not in the rubble of Kandahar. He was not waiting to die beside a ghost. He was in the snow, and his girl was watching him bleed. A profound, terrifying strength flooded Titan's broken body. He did not pull away from the bear's grip. Instead, he pushed into it, sacrificing a jagged strip of his own flesh to gain an inch of leverage. He twisted his neck with a violent, snapping motion, ignoring the sickening tear of muscle. Freeing his heavy skull, Titan lunged upward. He didn't aim for the thick hide of the throat. He drove his jaws directly into the bear's highly sensitive snout. His canines sank deep into cartilage and nerve endings. Titan locked his jaw and threw his entire 70-pound body weight backward, tearing downward with the brutal, mechanical efficiency of his breed. The bear released a scream that sounded horrifyingly human. The agony of the ruined shoulder, combined with the blinding pain in its face, shattered its predatory drive. The madness of starvation was suddenly overpowered by the primal instinct to survive. The massive beast wrenched its head free, spraying dark blood across the pristine snow. It stumbled backward, its chest heaving, eyeing the mangled, bloody dog that stood between it and the girl. Titan did not fall. He stood swaying on 3 legs, his chest torn open, his neck streaming crimson. He lowered his head and unleashed a sound that was no longer a bark or a growl. It was a demonic, rattling wheeze, a promise of absolute, mutually assured destruction. "Come back, I will kill us both," the bear broke. It turned its massive, ruined body and crashed blindly into the dense underbrush. Snapping saplings and shattering dead branches as it fled deep into the abyss of the woods. Titan stood perfectly still, his amber eyes tracking the receding shadow until the chaotic crashing faded into the hiss of the winter wind. The perimeter was secure. Slowly, the adrenaline evaporated, leaving only the devastating reality of his wounds. The world tilted sideways. Titan's front legs collapsed, and he fell heavily onto his side, his breath hitching into a wet, shallow rattle. The snow beneath him rapidly turned a brilliant, horrifying red. Small knees hit the ice beside him. Ilara fell into the snow, her yellow pajamas soaking up the blood. She didn't hesitate, she didn't shrink away from the gore. She threw her small body over his chest, pressing her bare, freezing hands directly against the gaping lacerations on his ribs. "No, no, no," she chanted, her voice thick with panic, the dam of her silence breaking completely. "Titan, stay right here, look at me." Titan's eyelids fluttered. He tried to lift his heavy head to lick the tears from her cheek, but his muscles refused to obey. He settled for resting his nose against her wrist, inhaling the faint, sweet scent of strawberry soap beneath the overpowering metallic stench of his own blood. He felt a profound sense of peace. The phantom leash was gone. The war in his head was over. He had finally completed his mission. "Don't you leave me." Ilara screamed, pressing her face against his ruined neck. "You promised. You stayed with me, you have to stay." Footsteps crunched violently through the snow. Sarah burst through the tree line, a heavy iron fireplace poker gripped in her trembling hands, her face completely drained of color. "Ilara." Sarah dropped the iron and fell beside them, her hands hovering over the horrific scene, unsure of where to touch without causing more pain. Sirens wailed in the distance, a high, piercing sound cutting through the winter air. Titan's eyes slowly drifted shut. The cold was finally seeping into his bones, a gentle, numbing blanket pulling him down into the dark. The last thing he felt was the small, desperate heartbeat of the girl pressed against his ribs, fighting to keep him tethered to the earth. Chapter 9. The Ghost in the Dust. The heat returned. It was the dry, baking heat of the Afghan sun. Titan stood in the center of a dusty road, the scent of dried sage and diesel fuel heavy in his lungs. His body felt incredibly light. The agonizing ache in his hind leg was completely gone. The tearing pain in his neck was erased. He shook his coat, sending a cloud of copper dust into the air, and looked ahead. Standing 10 yards away, framed by the blinding glare of the desert sun, was Sergeant Miller. He was wearing his combat uniform, smelling of peppermint gum and gun oil. He looked whole, he looked at peace. Miller crouched down, resting his forearms on his knees, and smiled. "Hey, buddy," Miller's voice echoed, warm and familiar. He patted his thigh twice. "Come." Titan took a step forward. His tail, which hadn't wagged with true joy in over a year, began to sweep back and forth in a slow, rhythmic arc. He wanted to close the distance. He wanted to press his head against Miller's chest and listen to the steady drumbeat of his heart. He wanted to go home. He took another step. Beep. A sharp, synthetic sound pierced the desert air. Titan paused, his ears swiveling. Beep. The sound didn't belong here. It smelled of iodine, sterilized steel, and fear. His blood pressure is crashing, a panicked voice echoed from the sky. "Push another milligram of epi. He's hemorrhaging too fast. We're losing him." Titan looked back at Miller. The soldier's smile softened into something deeply sorrowful. Miller stood up, looking past Titan, staring into the great, empty distance. "Titan." It wasn't Miller's voice. It was small. It was trembling. It was the scent of rain and strawberries. "Please, I need you." Titan stood paralyzed between two worlds. Ahead of him was the only father he had ever known, standing in the warm light of peace, offering an end to the pain. Behind him was a cold, terrifying world of snow and grief, where a broken little girl was begging him to carry her weight a little longer. Miller raised his hand. He didn't pat his leg this time. He flattened his palm and pushed it downward in a slow, deliberate motion. "Stay." It was the final command. Miller snapped a crisp salute, turned, and walked away, dissolving into the blowing copper dust until there was nothing left but the bright, blinding light. Titan turned his back on the light. He opened his jaws, filled his lungs, and ran toward the dark. Beep, beep, beep. The flat line shattered into a frantic, staccato rhythm. "We have a pulse. Heart rate is stabilizing. Keep pressure on that neck wound. Let us get him stitched up now." Titan couldn't open his eyes. His body felt like it was encased in lead, drowning in a sea of fire and sharp needles. But through the haze of the anesthesia, he felt a familiar, grounding weight resting gently over his paws. He took a slow, rattling breath and anchored himself to the living. Chapter 10. The scent of spring. The thaw came late in April, turning the frostbitten earth into a soft, fragrant carpet of damp soil and blooming lilac. The glass patio door slid open with a soft whoosh. Titan stepped out into the morning sunlight. He moved slower now. The limp in his left hind leg was more pronounced, and a thick, hairless white scar wrapped around the right side of his neck, ending where half of his right ear had been torn away. He looked like a patchwork quilt of survival, rugged and heavily weathered. He walked to the edge of the patio and stopped. He raised his head, closing his eyes as the gentle spring breeze washed over him. He inhaled deeply. He smelled the wet earth. He smelled the fresh green shoots of grass. He smelled a squirrel 2 trees over, chewing on a bitter acorn. There was no sulfur. There was no pulverized drywall. There was no bitter stench of infected blood or lurking predators. The woods were just woods again. Titan. He turned his heavy head. Alara walked onto the patio. She was wearing a light denim jacket and a pair of bright red sneakers. The blank, haunting emptiness that had once defined her face was completely gone, replaced by a quiet, resilient warmth. She walked over to him and sat down cross-legged on the sun-warmed concrete. In her hands, she held a brand-new sketchbook. Titan limped over and collapsed beside her with a heavy, contented sigh, resting his chin heavily on her thigh. Alara opened the book. "I want to show you something," she said, her voice clear and steady. She turned the pages. There were no more dark, jagged scribbles of the menacing tree line. There were no more terrifying shadows. She stopped on a page near the middle. It was a beautiful, meticulously detailed charcoal drawing of two figures walking down a sunlit road. One was a tall man in a military uniform, a rucksack on his back, looking over his shoulder with a gentle smile. Walking right beside him, perfectly at heel, was a young, unscarred Belgian Malinois. Titan stared at the image. He let out a soft huff through his nose, his tail thumping once lazily against the concrete. "My dad," Alara whispered, gently stroking the fur behind Titan's remaining good ear. "And you," she turned the page, this drawing was different. It was rendered in vibrant, colored pencils. It showed a small girl in a yellow raincoat, her arms wrapped tightly around the thick neck of a heavily scarred, gray-muzzled dog. They were standing on a porch, looking out at a brilliant, clear blue sky. "And this is us," she said softly. Titan looked up into her pale green eyes. He didn't see a broken child anymore. He saw his handler. He saw his pack. He lifted his head and gently licked the side of her face, tasting salt, sunlight, and the promise of tomorrow. The scars they carried, the missing ear, the permanent limp, the empty chair at the dining room table would never fully vanish. They were the physical maps of where they had been, the violent, terrifying terrain they had crossed. But as Titan rested his head back onto Alara's lap, listening to the steady, comforting rhythm of her heartbeat, he finally understood. Survival wasn't about forgetting the scent of the things you lost. It was about learning to breathe in the scent of the things you still had left to protect. The breeze shifted, carrying the smell of blooming lilac and strawberry soap. Titan closed his eyes, and for the rest of his days, he never dreamt of the dust again.